Good morning. I have to confess that at the point I was, confused, which of the gospels to take, the longer one or the shorter one. I began with the shorter one. I was like, could that be what they have there on the screen? I had to go back to the longer version. Oh, it happens. Well, it's nice to see you all this morning. Yeah. We are all here this morning because we truly want to encounter God. I mean, that is the reason why we come to church, to have a divine experience. And this experience, is so important for us because it is an experience that transforms us. So no one truly encounters God and remains the same. And that is what we have in this gospel, the encounter between Jesus and this Samaritan woman, and an encounter that transformed her life. It goes to say that no one truly encounters Jesus and remains the same. And we could actually identify, some aspects of our encounters with God in the encounter between Jesus and this Samaritan woman. So in this gospel reading, Jesus is revealing to us how we also, could encounter him, or how we must have encountered him. So her story, the story of this woman, could resonate with each of our stories. Because this woman, went to Jesus as a pagan, but she left Jesus as a believer. She went to Jesus as a Samaritan woman, but she left Jesus as an apostle. And not just an apostle, she left Jesus as an apostle to the apostles, because many other Samaritans came to believe Jesus because of her testimony. That is important. And it means that when we have encountered God, it is not for ourselves alone, that we are to share the gift of Jesus Christ to others around us. So people around us should be able to encounter Jesus through us, through our testimonies and through our actions. Now, this woman in this gospel, came to Jesus with an empty jar. She came to the well of Jacob with an empty jar, and her empty jar could represent the emptiness in her life. It could represent her frustration. It could represent her failed marriages. And that is important because she's been married to 5 men, and she was with the 6th man as of the time she met with Jesus by the well of Jacob. And to further express her emptiness and failed marriages, when Jesus said to her, "Go call your husband and come back," what was her response? The woman responded, "I do not have a husband. I do not have a husband." Now, this was someone who has had 5 husbands and who was with her 6th man. But for this woman, it was all emptiness. It was all emptiness and misery that she could say, "I do not have a husband." Her condition was that bad that she felt that she had no one in her life. It is like being in a relationship and you still feel so estranged from your partner. It is like being in marriage and at the same time you feel you're not in marriage. And what we see here, my dear friends, is that we could even feel lonely. We could feel lonely even in the midst of the crowd around us. Why do we feel so lonely in our relationships? Why do we feel so lonely even in marriages? We come to see in this gospel, my dear friends, that it is no surprise. It is no surprise that Jesus Christ became for this woman the 7th man. Recall, she has had 5 husbands. Now she was with her 6th man. Yet she felt empty. She felt frustrated. Now she has this encounter with Jesus, the seventh man. The number 7 signifies perfection. It signifies completion. Which means, my dear friends, that for the joy she had lost in her marriages, for the emptiness she had experienced in her life, now you could see that she was at the well of Jacob. She was at this well, what time? At noon. She was by the well of Jacob at noon. And that was an odd time to be by the well of Jacob, because people would usually go to the well of Jacob in the morning time or in the evening time. But this woman went to the well of Jacob at noon. That explains everything about her instability. It explains everything about her frustration. But right there, by the well of Jacob, she met with her complete joy. She met with her stability. She found her 7th man. She found the man who would not condemn her. She found the man who would not judge her for her failed marriages, but the man who gave her hope. So we see in this encounter that the sinner came face to face with the sinless. We see that sin came face to face with mercy. She came with her brokenness and she was healed by her 7th man. Jesus is our 7th man. He is our complete joy. He is our complete happiness. There is not a friend like the lowly Jesus. No, not one. Because none else could heal our soul's diseases. No, not one. Jesus knows all about our struggles, and he will guide till the day is done. There is not a friend like the lowly Jesus. No, not one. My dear friends, our lives will always be like the empty jar until we have found Jesus. Now listen to the stages of transformation in the life of this woman. When Jesus asked her to give him water to drink, what was the response of this woman? How can you, a Jew, ask me, a Samaritan woman, for a drink? She called Jesus a Jew, and she asked this question: how can you, a Jew, ask me, a Samaritan woman, for a drink? She asked this question because of the long-standing enmity between the Jews and the Samaritans. Because the Samaritans were the Jewish remnants during the Babylonian captivity who intermarried with the Gentiles. And because of that intermarriage, they were even considered to be impure for temple worship. They weren't allowed to worship in the temple of Jerusalem. So you had this long-standing enmity because the Jews would see the Samaritans as betrayers. She gave this response, and her response could reveal the level of her spiritual life at that point. She was at the level of racial discrimination. How can you, a Jew, ask me, a Samaritan woman, to give you water to drink? At that point, she was seeing Jesus from the lens of race. What happened, my dear friends? What did Jesus do? Jesus had to take her beyond that level of race. Jesus had to take her beyond that level of race, by asking her this question: if you knew the gift of God and who is saying to you, give me a drink, you would have asked him and he would have given you living water. Living water. What is the living water? The living water is the Holy Spirit. Now we have to go back to Pentecost. What happened, when the disciples received the Holy Spirit? They spoke in various languages. The Holy Spirit gave them utterance, and they spoke in various languages, and they could understand each other as they spoke. It means that the language of Pentecost is a language of love. It is a language of unity. It is unity in diversity. And that was exactly what was lacking in this woman. So Jesus Christ had to ask this question. If you knew who was standing before you, you would have asked him to give you living water. So Jesus, by asking this question, took this woman beyond the level of racial discrimination to the level of intellectual reflection. Because this woman now responded. Listen to the response of this woman. Now, she now called Jesus Sir. So the first title was, "You are a Jew." Now, the next one was that Sir. Sir. And that is so important. She now moved from the level of primitivity to the level of intellectual reflection. But Jesus would not stop at that intellectual reflection, because our intellect alone are not sufficient for us to worship God. So Jesus will have to take her beyond the level of the intellect to the next level, because when she called Jesus Sir, she was now beginning to show respect to the man before her. But that level is not enough, because God is larger and bigger than our intellect. He is larger and bigger than our logic. So what did Jesus do? Jesus now began to tell her about her life. He began to tell her about her life and about the fact that she has had 5 husbands, and that the man she was living with was the 6th man. And the moment Jesus told her about her life, what did she say? Listen to her response. "Sir, I can see that you are a prophet." You see that? So the first response, she called him a Jew. The second one, Sir. Now the third one, "I can see that you are a prophet." And my dear friends, when we look at this level, we'll see that it is a level of moral reflection, because at the level of moral reflection, we are actually torn between good and evil, right and wrong, truth and falsehood. This woman now began to accept the truth about the identity of Jesus Christ, that he is indeed a prophet. Now we come to understand why Jesus was thirsty and why he went to the well of Jacob. Jesus was thirsty not just because he needed to drink water. Jesus was thirsty for souls. So at the well of Jacob, it is not so much about the Samaritan woman searching for water. It is more about Jesus searching for souls, searching for God's people to come back to him. Recall that famous hymn, "Come home, come home. You who are weary, come home. You who are frustrated and feel empty. You who feel tired because of failed marriages and because of failed relationships, come home. Come to your seventh man." Earnestly, tenderly, Jesus is calling, "O sinner, come home." And then finally, Jesus took her to the final level, the spiritual level, when he told her that those who worship God will worship God not on this mountain, not in Jerusalem, but to worship God in truth and in spirit. And that is so important, my dear friends, because God is spirit, and we are to worship God in spirit. We are to worship God through the Holy Spirit. God is the truth. We are to worship God, by the truths he has revealed to us. And this is the truth of divine revelation. And what did she say? "I know that the Messiah is coming, the one called the Christ." Now look at the development of her faith. She began by calling Jesus a Jew, and then she called him Sir, and then she called him a prophet. Now she calls him the Messiah. She calls him the Christ. What happened at this point? The moment she recognizes Jesus as the Christ, what did she do? She left her jar of water, went into the town, and began to talk about him. She began to talk about this man who told her everything about her life. Now all things have passed away and everything has become new. She is now an apostle, and her lips must now declare the praise of God. I would want to invite us, my dear friends, to reflect on our spiritual journey Where are we in our spiritual journey? Are we still at the primitive level of racial discrimination or prejudice? Or are we at the level of intellectualizing and rationalizing? And we have to know that intellectualization or rationalization could be defense mechanisms. Or are we at the moral level where we are only interested in the do's and don'ts of life, where our lives are strictly governed by laws and commandments? Or are we at a spiritual level, the level of true freedom? Freedom from primitivity, freedom from defense mechanisms, freedom from our pride, freedom from bias and prejudice, freedom from a legalistic or regimented lifestyle, but the freedom to worship God in truth and the Spirit.